It happened 60 years ago today, the enormous and historic March on Washington. It's where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., calling for racial justice, delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech.
Chicagoans were well represented at that march as well, thanks in large part to the efforts of a writer, political strategist, and activist who knew Dr. King well.
His name is Don Rose, and he shared his memories of that day and more with CBS 2's Jim Williams.
60 years after the March on Washington, after all this time, it's not every day you interview a Chicagoan who knew and worked with Dr. King. This is a clear memory for you.
Absolutely.
This moment here.
Absolutely. It's one of the few pictures I ever had with Dr. King.
Moreover, Don Rose, then in his early 30s, helped organize the Chicago contingent that traveled to the nation's capital in August of 1963. By then, Rose had been fighting racism for a decade. In 1953, he pushed for integration here at the Trumbull Park Housing Project. Angry white residents of the community rioted to keep out 10 African-American families. They called you an N lover.
Yes, they did. They called me an N lover.
When plans for the March on Washington were hatched, Rose and his friend, acclaimed historian and activist Timuel Black, went to work, leading efforts to encourage Chicagoans to make the trip.
We had people organizing on the streets like it was a political campaign. We did as much media. Fortunately, the thing did attract some attention. Press coming in, TV coming in to look at us doing our organizing, just as you might call it like a model political campaign.
A campaign that was enormously successful.
We started modestly lining up one freedom train, and we managed to get enough signatories, enough people wanted to come in, so we had 2 chartered trains.
These were charter trains?
Charter trains.
No one on those trains but those going to Washington for the march?
Correct.
Others traveled by car and air. Rose says as many as 3,000 Chicagoans were in Washington, joining an estimated 250,000 at the Lincoln Memorial, then the largest ever demonstration for civil rights in the nation. Don Rose was right there with them.
You were just in the sea of humanity. It was a celebratory thing. Everybody, we bump into people, oh, excuse me, everybody was, courteous to each other, loving, and, whatever we're doing, I don't know whether we were raising fists or going like this to everybody.
All creating one of the pivotal moments and hearing one of the pivotal speeches in American history.
I have a dream today.
Its impact, though, was unclear to Rose at the time.
We did not know, had no way of knowing how this would have reverberated around the world.
Even after you heard it and the audience reaction, did you say this is going to be one of the iconic moments in world history?
Had no way of knowing any more than hearing him speak in Chicago a year or 2 earlier, that this was going to be one of the great iconic speeches of all time. And that began to seep in after we came back to Chicago.
Later that year, Rose was an organizer of the black student boycott to protest segregation in Chicago public schools.
At least 15 schools that we can say have a virtual total boycott.
And when Dr. King lived in Chicago in the mid-1960s to fight for equality here, Rose was his press secretary and advisor. Rose compares Dr. King's speeches to the great jazz musicians.
The way a Charlie Parker or John Coltrane would state the theme, state the melody, go off for a wild improvisation, and come back right to the note.
Rose, soon to be 93 years old, has been a stalwart of progressive politics in Chicago. Jane Burns, campaign manager, as she shocked the Democratic machine to win the race for mayor in 1979. When Byrne later embraced the very elements of the machine she had decried, Rose supported the man who defeated her, Harold Washington, Chicago's first black mayor. We asked Rose how he sees himself.
Lifelong progressive, trying to take as many steps forward and absorb the blows backward, and I guess I'm still doing it.
Still doing it and reflecting on the thousands who came to Washington in 1963, what Don Rose calls the racial education of America. So, Don, here we are 60 years later. How should we look at it?
We're about halfway where it should be. We've had moments of progress, and we've had moments of regression. Is the glass half full or half empty? And I would say, best I could say is it's a little more than half full.